because most people think of hydration as simply plain water, or at most matching the saltiness of your sweat. And I don't even see a whole lot of people even recommending that, but it's actually matching the saltiness of your blood, which is going to improve its absorption and be able to expand your own blood volume, which is the key. It's boosting cardiac output, number one. So that's decreasing basically oxygen demand on heart. Number two, it's giving you a larger volume to dissipate heat, because we need to understand we lose volume from our blood to cool off. Like the sweat has to come from somewhere.
Hey friends, welcome back. So today's show is brought to you by Myoscience Nutrition. Tools to help you support your athletic performance, healthy hydration, and recover from things like going in the sauna. All topics that we are going to drill down today further with Dr. James DiNicolantonio, the best-selling author of multiple books that I will link below. So if you're interested in going in the sauna, recovering from exercise, getting a little bit more mileage out of your workout, you should consider the electrolyte sticks that are relatively new from Myoscience. There's over 138 reviews from real customers, people like you, who are excited from switching off products that contain Morton's table salt and electrolytes that don't feature the synergistic nutrients like taurine, like creatine, albion chelated dimagnesium malate, and other beneficial nutrients. So don't take my word for it. Check out some of the reviews that I will link below over at myoscience.com. That's myoscience.com. Myoscience with an X. Check out the electrolyte sticks. I will put links below. Many reviews, people just like you, athletic people, weekend warriors, people who are sick of having leg cramps and things like that at night. You can see what they are saying. And if you decide to give it a try, 30-day money-back guarantee, you can use the coupon code PODCAST to save 15%. That's PODCAST to save 15% on this novel, unique combination of a multi-ingredient electrolyte with creatine and taurine combo. So check it out. And also in the links below will be links to some of my favorite books from Dr. James DiNicolantonio. He's a good friend of mine. I really enjoy his company, his information. Normally we do in-person video-based podcasts, but this is just a Zoom conversation, and we're talking about hydration. We're talking about athletic performance. We're talking about thermal stress, going in the sauna, recovery, periodization to increase fat loss and all that, and mostly drawing off new information from his book, Win, which is an amazing detailed expose about all things that you can do to optimize your physical performance and recovery. So I'll put links below to that and other past conversations that we've had. Definitely check out his book, The Salt Fix, bestseller for sure. An amazing book. You'll definitely enjoy it. And last but not least, my video, for some reason, when I hit to stop the record, the file got corrupted. And because we did this virtual and you see me all the time anyway, you're not going to see me henceforth, which is totally fine. You're going to get all the links to the timestamps in the show notes below, so it's all good. But I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. James DiNicolantonio. It's great to have you back on the show. We have done 2 in-person conversations about your various books. You're the best-selling author of more than 5 books, and you've authored or co-authored more than 300 academic articles. So it's an honor to be with you. And I've been diving into your work about salt over the past several years, but especially in your new book, Win. And maybe we can just start off. I want to get into all the details of hydration, of heat stress and cold stress and recovery strategies and creatine and all that. But, I'm sure you've seen the reports from JAMA and various other articles that have found that a lot of people have gained weight due to the stress and reduced mobility over the last couple of years. So if we're just talking simple ideas and exercise modalities for people, because you highlight in the first chapter of your book all about the different ways that we can exercise. There's zone 2 training, there's hypertrophy, there's HIIT training. From all the research that you've done for the average person who's not an elite athlete, when it comes to sustainable ways to support longevity and prevent age-related fat gain and all of that, what's some big picture advice that you would give for some of those folks?
That's a great question. I mean, undoubtedly doing resistance training of some sort, 30 to 60 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, is going to obviously reduce the risk of sarcopenia, or basically the loss of muscle mass and strength as we age, which can lead to frailty and fractures and even death. So I think, keeping your muscle is super important. And the easiest way to do that is just resistance training. Of course, then, there's your standard cardio zone 2 training, which is essentially, running at 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, and doing that boosts your endurance. And then high intensity interval training, or what's called supramaximal interval training, which is basically sprinting as fast as you can, like for 30 seconds, and then resting for 30 seconds and doing that multiple times. Doing that like 2 to 3 times a week is going to help with your cardiovascular, basically benefits.
What are you personally doing now? I know you've changed your routine a little bit. You're doing more, is it Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu? You're doing some more sort of martial arts, so to speak, in conjunction with your resistance training?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm more focusing on functional movements at this point. And so basically moving my body in a way that I would move it, but with added resistance, whether that's with resistance bands or using things like electromagnetic resistance from tonal machines. But basically for my cardio, I do a lot of shadow boxing and kicking because it's, I don't know, it's quick and it's a super, very intense way to get cardio. So it's like hit and smit all at once. And I just find that is just something, because I work with a lot of MMA athletes too, that sort of drove that interest in kind of utilizing something that's fun to build your cardio and strength at the same time.
That's awesome. It seems like that's becoming more and more popular. I know there's a lot more like boxing studios coming on, and people are transitioning to that sort of way to incorporate, a movement that you might do, not that you're going to box every day in life, right? But you're moving your muscles in a way that is more natural for the human body. And I think that's one of the benefits, if you can look at it that way, with the pandemic, is we were forced to do more body weight type movements, and whether it's bear crawls or air squats or lunges or things like that, because we didn't have access to a gym. And I've seen a resurgence in this sort of activity, which I think is unique because it lowers the barrier to entry. And a lot of people kind of say, well, I don't have time to go to the gym, or I don't belong to a gym, I can't afford it. But you can do these different exercises, which is pretty cool. So you do work with a lot of MMA athletes and things like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, mostly on hydration is primarily what they suffer on, because they use sauna to cut weight, and they don't realize that they're losing a lot of salt and fluids when they do that, and other minerals. So I primarily work with on their nutrition and supplementation, but also their hydration.
Which is key. And so let's maybe transition to more hydration as an ergogenic aid. If you were to survey maybe 100 people on the street and that lift weights or that exercise, and you say, hey, what are your top performance supplements? I'm sure you'd hear creatine, HMB, taurine. You'd hear about carnosine, beta alanine. I bet like maybe 5% would say like, oh yeah, I use salt and I use, hydration strategies to improve sports performance. So you've really dove into this, and I think it's phenomenal to talk about sort of salt preloading, warming up to the exercise, and all of that. So if you were to just give us a big overview of how salt can be utilized as an ergogenic aid and enhance performance, what does that sort of look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to sort of level set, some of your top ergogenic aids would be things like beetroot juice, or like you had mentioned, beta alanine. Now, that's only going to allow you to vigorously exercise maybe 1 to 2 minutes longer. Whereas if you dose salt correctly, you can actually exercise over 20 minutes longer. So it's essentially 20 times as good as any type of ergogenic supplement that you would take. So that's the difference. And like you said, not a lot of people actually realize how much more beneficial preloading with salt and fluids would be compared to your top supplements. It's 10 to 20 times better. So I think that helps level set it for people. Now, what's interesting is the main benefit is from the boost in blood volume prior to vigorous exercise. And the reason why you want to boost blood volume prior to vigorous exercise is because when you start exercising vigorously, you have a competition of blood flowing from the heart, but now it has to flow to working skeletal muscle. And then it also has to flow to the skin to dissipate heat. So you have competition now for blood. And you have about an 8 to 10% drop in blood volume within 5 minutes of vigorous exercise. So if you can get ahead of that problem, you're going to dramatically improve your performance. And there's two really key things I think that a lot of people should understand is the biggest adaptation that the body goes through during vigorous endurance exercise is it will try to increase its baseline blood volume. That's one. Number two, if you give people IV saline, and you prevent the drop in blood volume that happens with vigorous exercise, you don't see a drop in performance. So we know the linchpin on improving performance is maintaining blood volume from those two aspects. And so when you think about it, a typical male adult has 5 liters of blood, a woman has 4. elite athletes will have a 40% increase in blood volume. Male elite athletes sit about 7 liters, and really elite rowers can actually have 9 to 10 liters of blood volume. So there's a tremendous spectrum and a tremendous basically gap that you can improve on. And a quick way to sort of reach that gap is to preload with salt and fluids.
This is really interesting. I think a lot of people that have studied exercise, when I think of these sort of adaptations that occur when you habitually exercise over time, we think of sort of the neuromuscular contraction and increased mitochondrial density and all of these different factors that relate to the muscle. The last thing that I would ever, like if I were to do a multiple choice test on exercise physiology, blood volume would be sort of the last adaptations that I would consider to be very favorable to improve performance. But it seems that this is a major aspect to adaptation. So training in and of itself habitually leads to the body being more efficient, independent of salt and fluid intake and so forth. This is one of these adaptations that is really sort of malleable with training.
Correct. Yes, exactly. And the thing is you don't necessarily always want to preload with very high doses of salt and fluid. That is specifically for prior to an event, prior to competition. You absolutely always want to do that. However, it seems that dehydration acclimation, where you induce mild amounts of dehydration multiple times, will help build your blood volume. And then prior to competition, you can do the very, very high salt loading. So how I utilize salt loading is if I have really lack of energy, I don't feel like working out, then I'll preload with salt and fluids because you're going to have energy after you do that. Or if before a hard training session, even if I feel pretty good and I know I'm going to go really hard, I'll probably preload with some salt and fluid, but just not as much as I would prior to, let's say, competition. And we can talk about, what the optimal concentration should be and how you should be consuming these things.
Interesting. That was going to be my next question, is if we always preload salt for exercise, do we sort of circumvent that adaptation? So what I heard you say right there, just to sort of paraphrase, is you don't use this every single time. It's more of, and I always think of swimmers when I think of like the psychology of this. They train with hairy legs and arms and all that, and then before training day, they shave down, and just the feeling in the water, you're sort of gliding more, and it may enhance, sort of that mental aspect and increase, sort of output on that particular competition day. So that's sort of the way that you want to do this in a sense, feeling lethargic, you're jet lagged, whatever, right? You watch Netflix with your daughter or something like that. So you're up late, you might want to use salt, but on before every single workout, you may not want to dose it at least as high as perhaps you would during a competition or a day where you really want to optimally perform.
Exactly. So essentially before like a typical workout, I think it's pretty smart to have maybe 1,000 milligrams of sodium and 10 to 16 ounces of fluid. But if you're talking about the doses that really have evidence for improving performance dramatically, because they're going to boost blood volume by around 8 to 10%, you really have to have anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,300 milligrams of sodium and about 26 ounces to 33.8 ounces of fluid, which the 33.8 ounces of fluid is a full liter of fluid. And really actually that which is slightly hypertonic or slightly more salty than the blood, actually seems to be even better than matching your the concentration exactly as your blood, which is interesting because most people think of hydration as simply plain water, or at most matching the saltiness of your sweat. And I don't even see a whole lot of people even recommending that, but it's actually matching the saltiness of your blood, which is going to improve its absorption and be able to expand your own blood volume, which is the key. But even slightly hypertonic, even going a little bit higher, actually seems to be even more beneficial.
There's a few things that I want to dive deep into if you're okay with this. What does the increased blood volume do? Is it increase nutrient delivery to the muscles? Is it increase removal of waste products? Like how specifically, I mean, without getting into the super nuances of maybe intracellular pH or calcium, whatever, but the big picture, what is the blood volume specifically doing?
Big picture, it's boosting cardiac output. Number one, so that's decreasing basically oxygen demand on heart. Number two, it's giving you a larger volume to dissipate heat, because we need to understand we lose volume from our blood to cool off. Like the sweat has to come from somewhere. It's being drawn, part of it, from your blood volume. So if you boost your fuel, you boost that tank, you literally have more fluid to now cool you off quicker. So that's one of the other benefits, but it is true too. When you have a larger blood volume, you can actually pull out metabolic waste. In other words, the hydrogen ions, which is the acid, you can pull that out of the cell better too. And you can deliver nutrients better as well. But I think the primary benefit is the increase in cardiac output and the decrease in oxygen demand on the heart.
That's super fascinating. I mean, if you were to think of, in PE class, like going back to high school or junior high school, kids that weren't very fit, for example, running a mile, we used to do the mile time test or some pull-ups or whatever, they would look really exhausted and be very hot, red in the face, sweating everywhere. Whereas the athletes could, it's like you didn't even know if they really did the same work. So that ability to dissipate heat, I think, obviously we've all sort of experienced that. And I don't want to deviate too much from this conversation, but since we're here and I want to go back to salt, let's talk a little bit, if we could weave in the sauna. And I know you have this, I think chapter 3, you talk a lot about cold stress and heat stress in the book Win. So sauna bathing, is this another modality that can have sort of translation or carryover to sports performance, because you help with that ability to it causes the adaptation to increase the ability of the body to cool itself?
Exactly. So basically going into the sauna every single day for 2 weeks allows metabolic adaptations to occur, very similar to dehydration acclimation. So you're becoming heat acclimated. There's many adaptations that occur when you become heat acclimated. Number one, your baseline core body temperature becomes lower. So now you actually have a larger pool to soak up heat, and it takes longer for you to hit a critical core temperature, which means you can train and you can perform longer before basically enzymes that produce ATP start shutting down, because certain enzymes are heat sensitive. So you have a lower baseline core body temperature. The other adaptation that occurs is your sweat becomes more dilute. You stop losing as much electrolytes. And the benefit for that is when you have a more dilute sweat, it actually evaporates faster when it's more dilute. So you cool your body self off better and faster. And the threshold for sweating goes down. In other words, you actually start to sweat faster when you are heat acclimated. So you are literally a better cooling off machine when you go into the sauna every single day, let's say for 2 weeks. Now, how long you have to go and what temperature you have to hit, you need to basically hit a core body temperature of 101.3. And you want to try to maintain that for 20 to 30 minutes. And you want to do that for about 2 weeks consecutively. Once you have done that, you are now heat acclimated, and most of those benefits will actually last out to 2 weeks as long as you maintain a good exercise program.
So much to take away from that. And I think a lot of people are looking for the granularity when it comes to sauna duration, sauna time. And I haven't heard anyone articulate that and put language to it like you just did. You need to do this consecutively, just like you would if you want to increase your bench press or your squat or your sprinting time. You really need to be vigilant about this for a consecutive period of time. So that's a wonderful tip. And just, this is a super small anecdotal story. I just want to share this. So my daughter and I have been going in the sauna together quite a bit. And I noticed she didn't sweat. It was weird. It was like, she's 9 years old and it would be hot as heck. And she wasn't sweating. And this was like, I built this sauna and all this over COVID. And so it's been about a year this week that we've been doing this pretty regularly, not every single day, but maybe 4 to 5 days a week. And just on Sunday night, I've noticed she is finally starting to sweat. And it was like, wow, it took that long to train her body and all this. So you can see like the beadlets coming on her forehead and her arms. And so it was interesting how, this ability to thermoregulate and all this is inducible. And I just thought that was quite interesting, because people will say, well, I don't sweat, so heat doesn't do anything for me. It's like, well, yeah, maybe you haven't trained yourself to learn how to do this with exercise or heat stress or anything like that. Fascinating stuff there. We can continue on with heat therapy, but I want to go back to blood volume, because I can sense some people might be resistant to, look, I have hypertension, doc said I should exercise, and now you're telling me to increase my blood volume, and presumably that goes along with increases in blood pressure. I already have high blood pressure. Should I be concerned with this way of improving my exercise performance by salt preloading and things like that? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, so what I would say is that athletic, vigorous endurance exercisers who have large blood volumes typically have very good blood pressure. So as long as your arteries are able to vasodilate well, and you don't have an increase in basically vasoconstriction with an elevation in blood volume, you're not going to see increases in blood pressure per se chronically. But going, just a quick note about the sauna, you don't have to go every single day. It just will take you a little bit longer to become heat acclimated. So if you're someone that typically just goes 4 times a week, that is okay. That will actually work. You just have to basically go for 3 weeks. You basically need about 13 sessions, and you need to hit about 4 sauna sessions per week for 3 weeks. And that will basically allow you to become heat acclimated.
Great tip. Yeah. A lot of people I found, just reading the comments, anytime I do a video related to sauna or sauna bathing, a lot of people will go after they exercise because it's at the gym. You know, they work out, they do resistance training or cardio, whatever, and then they'll go into the sauna after the gym. We're kind of jumping ahead. I wanted to talk to you about circadian rhythm of sports performance, but since we're here, we know that body temperature is highly influenced by circadian biology and all this. If you're going to split hairs, right? I suggest go in the sauna when you can, but if you're going to split hairs and choose to go in the sauna before exercise, after exercise, in the morning versus evening, what would be considered sort of optimal if you're trying to maximize benefits?
Well, to be fair, I don't think they've ever actually tested, let's say, sauna prior to exercise versus after. So I want to kind of preface it with that. However, the data does sit with doing sauna post-exercise in regards to increasing performance later on. So there was one clinical study, it was a 3-week study. It was sauna sessions of 30 minutes after post-exercise. It was a traditional sauna at about 190 Fahrenheit. And it was doing basically 13 sessions in total. And after those individuals did sauna sessions post-exercise, it basically, improved their performance by about 10%, which that's actually a large increase from a performance standpoint. Usually you're talking maybe 1 or 2% being clinically significant. So there was about a 10% increase in their performance after they had done that. And so I like post-exercise because it's a little bit more of a hormetic effect. You're basically inducing dehydration on top of mild dehydration. So you're going to get even more adaptations. And then typically you want to wait a little bit before, let's say, you cold plunge, because you still want to get all those adaptations.
That's a really good point. I think I've seen a lot of people go right to the cold shower or the ice bath. I mean, this is just, again, looking at this through Instagram videos, and you see people talking about how to biohack and stuff like that. But if you were to think about barbecuing a piece of meat or whatever, the cooking still happens after you pull it off the barbecue or the grill, right? You let it cool. And I've noticed with my own body. So what I'll do is I'll go and walk around or do some breath work or something like that. Let myself get to the point where I'm starting on the decline of cool, then do a contrast, and then wait and then go back in. But do you see people sort of, maybe not getting the maximum benefits of letting their body continue to heat up before they start the contrast?
Yeah, I do. I think it's pretty common that people, after exercise, if they're already hot, they'll just jump into a cold bath. Now, I guess it depends on what your goals are. If you are in an intense training camp and you're an MMA athlete, there's some benefits to doing an ice bath fairly quickly to shut down the inflammation so you can train hard again the next day. So, ice baths, which is a temperature of essentially 59 Fahrenheit or less, have been about, if you do that about for 3 minutes after exercise, that dramatically improves power output out to 96 hours. So you recover much faster, and your recovery compared to not doing that is better out to 96 hours. So if you're someone in an intense training camp, start cold plunging, that's fine. But if your goal is hypertrophy, like muscle, increasing the size of the muscle and increasing muscle strength, you don't want to cold plunge probably within 2 to 4 hours after exercising, because that will inhibit some of the gains that you would have gotten had you not done that.
Is that sort of like taking antioxidants after exercise? You don't want to take vitamin E, vitamin C, because there is favorable signaling from these so-called inflammatory cytokines that help with the adaptation. So there is context here. If you're talking about performance versus hypertrophy, there's different protocols for post-exercise cooling, huh?
Exactly. Right. So if you're more into endurance or you're more into recovery quickly because you're in a training camp, then, cold plunge all day, so to speak. But if you're someone who's looking to gain muscle and strength, then you want to wait 2 to 4 hours after your training session so you don't lose some of the increases in muscle strength and size that you would have gained.
Gosh, these conversations are so helpful for people because, you see a snapshot of a football player that everyone thinks, oh yeah, well he goes in the ice or she goes in the ice bath after a competition, the Olympics, football, whatever. So therefore, when I go to the gym, I should do the ice bath after. But there's subtleties here that are not really conveyed that I think is important. So, if you were to do 2-a-days, I remember when CrossFit was really big back in, I'm sure it's still big in certain circles, but 2014, 2015, there was always these posts of these people going in ice baths afterwards. And in some of those competitions, especially the games, there was multiple workouts throughout a day. It was like 2-a-day for football in the summer. So that would be a situation where if you're training multiple times a day, it makes a lot of sense to cool down the muscles and accelerate the recovery process so that you can have a consecutive workout later that would be optimal.
Exactly. So like you said, it just totally depends on what your goals are and like what exact sport you're performing in will depend on when you should do an ice bath, how cold it should actually be. And there are pre-cooling methods too that can dramatically improve performance. You don't have to do them pre-exercise, but even during exercise in short amounts of time, if you cool certain areas of the body, you can cool down core body temperature pretty quickly.
Fascinating stuff. Definitely want to get into more ergogenic aids and creatine and all of that. But since we're sort of here talking about temperature and chronobiology, one of the things that I've really found to be helpful in informing my routine with regards to exercise, especially during COVID when you couldn't go to the gym and all that, is exercising at the same time every day. And it just sort of helped, if nothing else, from a habit standpoint. But also I found that my body started to sort of anticipate that I am going to exercise. And it just made things a lot easier to stick to. With regards, and I know you have a full chapter all about chronobiology and circadian rhythms and sleep and all of that. But with regards to timing of exercise for hypertrophy, power, recovery, making it a habit, can we sort of unpack a little bit of what you found in the literature there, especially for people who, are trying to figure out, because I'm sure you get these questions. Should I do fasted cardio in the morning on an empty stomach, or should I lift later in the day? How important is chronobiology as it relates to sports performance?
Yeah, this is another question that is highly individualized and will depend on if you're a morning person or if you're a night owl. But essentially, around about 8 hours after you wake up is typically when you're going to perform the best. So for a typical person who, let's say, wakes up at 7 in the morning, somewhere between 2 and 5 p.m. typically is when you'll get your best workout. And actually, that's typically when I like to work out as well, because I like to have a lot of my cognitive powers early on in the day. Now, if you do a vigorous exercise, your cognition is shot for a couple hours after that because your body just put a ton of effort into, breaking down proteins and muscle and now is trying to rebuild. And so me personally, I like to work out a little bit later in the day, but you never want to work out too close to when you go to bed because it activates the sympathetic nervous system and you're never going to be able to fall asleep. So it's that tight balance that you need to figure out for yourself.
That's a really good point. A lot of people don't realize that you are kind of mentally shot after you exercise, especially if you exercise intensely. So on the one hand, it does wake you up. It's nice to have some caffeine and then go exercise. But I always found myself, and I thought maybe it was something wrong